Manhattan Neighborhood Network, in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York, the Amsterdam News, and Gotham Gazette, is pleased to bring you a debate between Democratic candidates running for mayor of New York City. Hello, I'm Ben Max, executive editor of Gotham Gazette.
And I'm Eleanor Tatum, publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The New York City primaries will be held on Tuesday, September 12th. The winner of the primaries, like this one for mayor, will be the Democratic nominee in November's general election.
We've invited all the candidates running as a Democrat for mayor to join us. New York City's current mayor, Bill de Blasio, did not respond to our invitation.
We've asked those who have joined us to keep their responses to 2 minutes and any rebuttals they may have to 30 seconds.
The candidates are seated by random drawing. Starting from my left, we have Robert Gangi, Richard Bashner, Sal Albanese, and Michael Tolkin. Thank you all for being here. Great to have you here ahead of primary day. Thanks so much. So we'll start with you, Mr. Tolkin. First question, you've never run for office before. Why are you running for mayor, and what makes you qualified to hold that position?
Sure. So the reason why I'm running is we face unprecedented challenges, and we need to be taking a much longer term approach. We need to be taking a much bigger picture approach to develop comprehensive solutions to our challenges, ranging from the economy, which is increasingly benefiting the rich and hurting the poor, to our crumbling mass transit system, to our healthcare programs that are just not cutting it any longer. And so as I thought about my role as a problem solver, an innovator, someone who comes from the private sector, I've started a number of companies as a tech entrepreneur, I think that we need that kind of fresh thinking and problem solving in government, in the political realm, and now's the time to do it. One, because the challenges are so significant, and two, because we have the tools and resources and know-how to be able to put in place really significant, sustainable solutions.
Does that background in tech make you qualified to be mayor of New York City?
I think part of it is my background in tech and having visibility as to what the future economy looks like, how we prepare for that economy, how we prepare our kids for the jobs of the future. So certainly that's a piece of it. But I've also run organizations. I've built organizations. I understand how to scale and structure organizations. And so from a management perspective, I think today our current administration is under Mayor de Blasio is not doing a good job managing the city and managing city operations. We're seeing that play out in quality of life issues where the streets are not clean, the subway's falling apart. Having a strong manager in office with a vision for what the future looks like is exactly what we need right now, and I think I can bring that to City Hall.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese.
Well, I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8. I attended the New York City Public Schools. I'm a CUNY graduate. I was a city council member for 4 terms, representing a very conservative district as a liberal Democrat. I was an Obama delegate in 2008. I won that race when the president was an underdog. And I have a passion for helping people. I had a great 15-year run on the city council where I passed the city's first living wage law. I was one of the key votes on the gay rights bill in 1986. I was the most independent member to ever serve in our body, never accepted a lulu or stipend. And being mayor of New York City is an opportunity to help people on a citywide level. It's been a passion of mine, and I am the New York City story. We didn't have much. My mother was a garment worker, and it was the city's institutions that elevated my family to the middle class. And I have a number of ideas on how to clean up corruption in the city, how to improve our public schools, how to build true affordable housing in New York City. And the mayor's job is a job where you can really impact people's lives. It's what being in the neighborhoods, listening to people, going into NYCHA and listening to those folks and basically I'm a good listener, and my experiences as an immigrant, as a legislator, I'm a lawyer with a background in finance, I think give me the broad-based experience that I need to run the city of New York.
Since you left elected office, what have you been doing?
I worked in finance for 12 years, and I'm in a law firm now for the last 6 years. I was in finance for 14 years.
Thank you. Mr. Bashner?
Well, I grew up in the Bronx, and my parents had not graduated from college. My dad was a disabled veteran who had multiple sclerosis and couldn't work as a result, so we lived on public assistance, Social Security benefits and disability benefits that my father was entitled to from his time in the Army. Against all odds, I got into Harvard College. I went there, worked my way through Harvard and NYU Law School. I graduated with honors, and I went on to clerk for federal Judge Edward Corman in the Eastern District. After that, I moved to Brooklyn. I got married. I made partner at a law firm in Manhattan, headed up their real estate practice for the past 20 years. And then I joined Brooklyn Community Board 6, 18 years ago. And on Brooklyn Community Board 6, I was promoted repeatedly. I became the treasurer for 4 years. I was the chair of Brooklyn Community Board 6 for 4 years until I was term limited. And I've served on the executive committee for 18 years. And so I've been deeply enmeshed in all of the decisions that affect one of our community boards, which is 159th of the city. We have issues ranging from wealthy people to poor people. We have about 12,000 people in NYCHA housing, about 105,000 people overall, representing the neighborhoods of Park Slope, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Red Hook, and Columbia Street. We've advised 3 different mayors during that time and the city council on all the policies affecting our neighborhood. We implemented a responsible development policy that governed how developers should act in our neighborhood. And I'm running for mayor because Mayor de Blasio has sold us out to developers and lobbyists, and he's run a corrupt administration. And in fact, he's not even here today to face all the accusations against him from his challengers. He's trying to duck any criticism and sort of run out the clock on this primary. And I have to say that he's a coward for not being here. Everyone else is here.
To follow up on something you said, you represented the community board, worked on it a long time, just going from that 159th of the city to being mayor of New York City. Is that an appropriate jump? Are you familiar enough with how it would be to govern the city?
I think I am. I think, to make a bad joke, I know my ACS from my elbow, for example, the Department of Child Services. I do think that I'm very familiar with the issues facing us. I've studied it. I think what we need is a leader, not a politician right now, to bring people together. I think the skill set that I bring as a real estate lawyer, as a negotiator, I know how to listen to people. I know how to build consensus. At the community board, I was able to listen to everybody, bring in diverse viewpoints, and come up with proposals that were supported, in many cases, unanimously or overwhelmingly to get our viewpoint across and to try to make a real impact on this city. And I think it's time for someone who can listen and work with elected officials, work with the governor, to do what we need to move the city forward and get back to business.
Thank you. Mr. Gangi?
Excuse me. It was striking to me. I didn't know that your old man had multiple sclerosis. My father had multiple sclerosis all my life. I didn't know him as an able-bodied person. So I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, lived in New York City my entire life. Working class, Sicilian, Italian family, poor family, in part because my old man was handicapped. So I've, again, lived here all my life, and I love the city, and I'm committed to making it a beautiful, wonderful place. My career has been in social and racial and criminal and human justice issues. Decided to run for mayor along with a group of advisors and family members who I had worked with on criminal and social justice issues because of a deep, deep disappointment with de Blasio. I voted for him in 2013. My guess is maybe some other people up here did also. He has been, I repeat what I said, a deep disappointment. He had the opportunity to be a kind of Bernie Sanders for urban issues. To be a true progressive fighting for racial justice, social justice, and economic justice. Instead, he has an affordable housing plan that provides housing units in low-income communities that are not truly affordable for the people who live in those communities. He has no significant plan to improve our public schools, to integrate our public schools. We're the third most our school system is the third most segregated in the country. Our biggest complaint with de Blasio, and we're going to make significant changes in policing and criminal justice, is he supports broken windows policing. Enthusiastically, publicly, and broken windows policing is blatantly racist policing, excuse me, deeply immoral policing that does harm to low-income people of color in our city every day. So the commitments that we have is not only to be very critical of de Blasio on these issues that involve social, racial, and economic justice. We have very specific proposals to achieve our vision of an inclusive city, a city that is safe and affordable and livable for everybody. So end broken windows policing on day one and orient the police department on addressing serious crimes rather than low-level infractions where they're targeting, again, almost entirely black and brown people for infractions that have been virtually ignored in white communities. With affordable housing, we're no longer going to work, as de Blasio does, with big real estate developers to provide housing. We will work only with local housing groups, and there are many, many of them throughout our city that have experience in maintaining housing, providing housing, and renovating housing.
We'll come back to some other specifics soon.
Sure.
Eleanor?
All right, so this city and the great city of New York that it is also very tied to what happens in Albany and what happens with our governor and our legislature. And as we all know, our governor and our mayor don't seem to get along very well. Would you be able to work better with Governor Cuomo than the mayor has? And if how, yes. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Albanese, on that question about how you would be able to govern with.
That's a great question. Look, as the mayor of New York City, you have no choice but to work with Albany because so much of the city's destiny is unfortunately run by the state legislature and the governor. And I've already reached out to the governor on mass transit because it's one of my key issues. I want to fund and fix the system. I want to increase the city's share. And I sent a letter to the governor, who I happen to know, by the way. I was one of his father's earliest supporters when Andrew was the campaign manager for his dad. So I have a long history with him, and don't support a lot of his views sometimes, but I can certainly relate to him and get things done because it's part of my job to deal with it. This mayor has a toxic relationship. I mean, it's to the point where they don't talk. And it started actually with the pre-kindergarten program. If you remember, that was Bill de Blasio's main issue. And when he got elected, he went to Albany and he asked for $300 million. And he also asked for the tax to rich plan, which he's rolling out again. So the governor gave him the $300 million. So instead of saying thank you, he turned around and continued to beat up on the governor over the tax to rich plan that he wanted. And that's how it all started. The governor being the governor never forgot, and now we're at the stage where they don't talk. And he also got involved in trying to overturn the state legislature from Democrat to Republican. It's a noble goal, but the mayor of the city of New York has to think about the city and how important the state senate is. You've got to have a working relationship with these people. So I was around when Koch was the mayor and Cuomo the elder was the governor, and they really didn't like each other. But they worked together to fix the trains. The track bed was falling apart. So I am committed to working with the governor and the legislature because it's my job to do so. I can't, this is not personal, it's business, Bob. So
Line from The Godfather.
we have to work together, and that is my aim. And as I said, I think that problem will go away when I become the mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Bashner?
Yes. This is a bigger question than just the relationship of the mayor and the governor. It's really a question of the mayor and everybody else. The mayor has approached everything in a sort of arrogant way with Soviet-style planning from above. He doesn't work well with people at any level of government. It's not only the governor, it's also the city council, it's also the local community boards. He's got people up in arms.
How would you work with the governor?
I would sit down with the governor and start by saying we need to establish a relationship. We're both New York boys. We both want what's best for the city. We both need to do what's best and work through real solutions to the problems that we have. So, for example, you don't embarrass the governor in public. You speak in privately with the governor and you work through the issues. We need to fund mass transit. Instead of firing shots across each other's bow about congestion pricing or taxing the rich, I would sit down and work with the governor on a real congestion pricing plan immediately. Everybody who passes over the tunnels, over the bridges or through the tunnels should pay at least $2.75, because that's what we pay on the subway to get into Manhattan, for starters. And then we can have congestion pricing with higher tolls as necessary. But the most important thing is to find other revenue sources as well. And the tax the rich proposal that the mayor trots out every time there's a problem is never going to pass. We need to work on other things. We have to bring back the commuter tax, because we have commuter rail lines that are being supported by the MTA. We also have to think about carbon tax. We see the devastation of Hurricane Harvey, and we see all of the problems that New York is going to face down the road with extreme weather and rising tides and everything else. And we need to do something more than just go to Germany and to talk about the Paris Accords. We need to do something here in New York about it, and we need to do it right now. So what would I do with the governor? I would sit down and work out real solutions, get down to business, stop embarrassing each other and fighting in the press, and work through what we really need to do for not only a short-term plan for transit, but a long-term plan. The billion-dollar plan is only a stopgap. We need to have something in the long term that fixes the signals and keeps our subways as the vital life network that they are.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Gangi, same question.
Well, the first thing I would do to win over Andrew Cuomo to my side on things is, as mayor, I would agree to take down the statue of Christopher Columbus and put up a statue of Mario Cuomo. And I think that would immediately warm his heart and look at me in a very friendly way. I think the main criticism I have of de Blasio in regard to the relationship with Cuomo, and what I would do differently is, Sal and Richard referred to this, it's not his only style of governance, but part of de Blasio's style of governance is to figure out how to avoid blame and responsibility for certain problems. So, for example, with Rikers Island, he was under a lot of pressure to respond and to come out for closing Rikers Island. So he comes up with a 10-year plan, which is a cockamamie plan, which even if he's reelected, he will not be mayor for at least 5 years before 2027. With the subways, he comes out with the tax the rich plan, which is dead on arrival in Albany. And he has repeated over and over again, the subways are not my fault. They're Andrew Cuomo's fault. And the sort of pointing the finger and engaging in public battles sometimes is appropriate if you have a specific goal that you think you can win that way. But when de Blasio does it, his main purpose is to insulate himself from blame and to lay the blame on other people and other sources and other organs of government. So what I would do to try to achieve a relationship with Andrew Cuomo, in addition to the Mario Cuomo statue, would be to on the MTA issue specifically, is to have a very particular plan for what the improvements would be, and to be very public about what those plans are, and to say that I want to work with the governor and I want to work with the state legislature in order to make those kind of things happen. And to, as much as possible, first of all, take responsibility. The subways are a New York City issue, even if I don't totally control them, and to be much as possible, look for ways where I can praise and give credit to the governor and the legislature.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Tolkin, same question.
So just to take a step back, I think the time for quick fixes and this piecemeal style approach where there's a problem that bubbles up and then we all scramble to react to it is over. So on day one, we're going to sit down, we're going to lay out our comprehensive plans, which cover everything from our economic development plan to social justice issues to legalizing marijuana, which, for a variety of reasons is a pragmatic approach to a lot of our criminal justice issues. Sit down, lay out our plans, and find common ground such that we're not just fixing problems in the short term, but we're laying the foundation to address a whole host of challenges on a long-term basis. I'm a collaborator coming from the private sector. You compete in some ways with other companies. In a lot of other ways, you're constantly collaborating and partnering and figuring out how to push your business further. It's no different in government. We have a series of challenges. We're proposing a series of solutions. The governor has been a big proponent of large infrastructure projects. So are we. We obviously need to be addressing our subway infrastructure as quickly as possible. And we have a plan to invest $25 billion in a capital improvement program, which I think we can use as a starting point for really meaningful collaboration.
Thank you. Ben?
We're going to start this round with Mr. Bashner. Affordability, you may agree with Mayor de Blasio, is the top issue on the minds of many New Yorkers, or you may have a different one that you think, schools or transportation or something else, but certainly affordability is a major concern of many, many New Yorkers. So what specifically would you do about affordability, which of course can include housing, but also jobs and wages and other things when you become mayor, Mr. Bashner?
Well, to pick up on the theme earlier, we have a mayor who is not able to work with other people, so we cannot get consensus to move forward on the dramatic building program that we need to build additional housing, which will lower housing expenses and create more options for people across the board. The housing plans that the mayor has proposed for affordability really aren't affordable. They're not affordable for the people who live in the neighborhood, and there are only a limited number of people who benefit from them. For the most part, he's trying to keep existing housing in good shape, but has been unable to build new housing. And when he has built new housing, it's been a limited number of people who win a lottery, almost like the Hunger Games, who get expensive, fancy apartments at deep discounts rather than broader affordability. So I would look to a different model, first of all, than the 70-30 program. I would look to a program more like the Battery Park City Fund, where the proceeds from development were used to build affordable housing and create deeper rather than deep discounts, creating smaller discounts spread among more people to help New Yorkers who are struggling and might be at risk of losing their apartments, and to build new housing. I also think that we need to have a dramatic building program on New York City Housing Authority property. The mayor's been unable to do that because his proposals don't benefit the people who live in NYCHA housing. What I would like to do is a different model of communal housing, senior housing, almost like a residential hotel, sort of like a WeWork or WeLive model where you have relatively small rooms, but tremendous services, a cafeteria downstairs, a sense of community, maybe a co-op in which people in the neighborhood can also get reduced meal costs and reduced food costs and nutritious meals with serving shifts to, again, create a sense of community. I'd like to see after school and evening programs to help children who are struggling in school in this type of setup. And this would be something that would benefit the people who live in NYCHA housing and would welcome it, I think, as an add-on. Because right now we have, in effect, naturally occurring retirement communities where people are getting older in place, and some have 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. And if they were willing to switch to other apartments, we'd free up a lot of empty apartments for families. And this would help us include people in the community. I don't think we should be building separate shelters and separate homeless facilities which become ghettoized. I think we need to incorporate it into the housing that we're building so that we have some senior housing, some housing for folks with disabilities, some housing for homeless families, for people who really do live in the community.
Just very quickly in 10 seconds, who's building that housing? Is it all, the city is managing that? It's all nonprofit developers, or who are you working with?
I would look to nonprofit developers. I would do it on NYCHA housing. I would look to do it in long-term leases potentially so that we could use design, build, and other efficient means of construction, which the city does not have open to it if the city builds it directly. But I would be very much against selling off public land and privatizing public assets like the mayor has done with libraries and parks and other things that once you sell them, you never get them back.
Thank you. Mr. Gangi, what would you do about affordability?
I like the way you phrased the question too, Ben. It's not just affordable housing. I think affordability cuts across a lot of issues, related issues. With affordable housing, we would cancel all of the de Blasio projects, all of the rezoning plans. We would apply what we would call a community median income to all the affordable housing and new housing that's being built in low-income communities. The criteria that the de Blasio administration has applied actually inflates the measurement for affordability because they go by something called the area median income, AMI, that includes the 5 boroughs and 3 surrounding counties, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam, where the average income in those counties for the most part, is above the average income for people, particularly people living in low-income communities of color. So we would work only with community-based developers, nonprofit developers to provide housing. We would have the city to build new public housing, particularly on vacant properties, and for all the new housing that the city either subsidizes or builds directly, it would only be affordable housing for low-income people who live in the communities where the housing is being built. Also, on policing issues, broken windows policing creates serious problems for low-income people in New York City. It criminalizes them, it hurts their chances to get jobs, it takes them away from their families for sometimes extended period of times. So the kind of policing we have now in the city aggravates the ability, particularly for poor people of color, to live well in the city. So eliminating the quota system, eliminating broken windows policing would open up opportunities for the people of color who are now targeted by those practices. We would start public works projects where the main people we would choose as participants in those projects would be unemployed and underemployed people from our inner city communities. We would make those public work crews available for the neighborhood housing groups that are building housing. We would send them onto the subways to do sort of mild or low-level infrastructure work and to clean up the subways.
Just quickly, to follow up, some of these things that you're saying, like the public works or all affordable, affordable
Right.
housing that's 100, it sounds like you would need a pretty significant increase in the city budget. Is that correct?
Well, we would look to cut certain parts of the city budget. By eliminating broken windows policing and the quota system and other changes we would make in policing, we would significantly reduce the police department's budget. We have a plan to close Rikers Island in year one. We would save hundreds of millions of dollars in the Department of Corrections budget. De Blasio has in his current budget $1.1 billion to design new jails. We would totally take that out of the budget. $275 million to build a new police academy. We would eliminate that from the budget. He wants to build a trolley to connect the Brooklyn and Queens waterfronts, $2.5 billion. We would take that out of the budget. So we would look for making reductions in what we consider to be wasteful practices, in some cases counterproductive to the quality of life practices like our policing approach, and use that money saved for schools, for affordable housing, for other social services.
Thank you. Mr. Tolkin, on affordability.
So I think that is the issue. Affordability, economic injustice is the most critical issue that we're facing today and the most critical issue that we're going to be facing tomorrow. So to that end, we've proposed a series of initiatives and investments to address it head on. Part of it is on the cost side, we need to be developing more affordable housing. We have a plan called NYC Homes where we're going to develop a series of new housing campuses, not too dissimilar from what Richard mentioned in terms of cultivating community, seamlessly integrated into the neighborhoods in which they exist, and again, developed with nonprofit developers. But more important than that, we need to get money in the hands of people today. So we're going to be proposing a series of tax cuts that immediately inject some capital into the pockets of the people who need it most, our lower income and no income communities. We're going to be investing heavily in new social programs and services because too many people are falling through the cracks of our social safety net, ranging from our universal mental health care program to a variety of other services, vocational training, job retraining, so that people can find work opportunities and again, upgrade their skills so that they can get higher paying jobs and have that sort of upward mobility with respect to their careers. And the last piece of this is reframing our economy in a way that benefits everyone, evolving capitalism from the sort of hyperbolic structure today where you have the rich getting much, much richer and everyone else kind of going into the poor category and our middle class just disappearing. We need to address that. So we are proposing what we call a public-private ecosystem, where instead of the public sector and the private sector being at odds with one another, we're working together on a series of initiatives and programs in order to fund our massive investments in infrastructure, city services, and social programs. We've identified a new source of revenue for the city. We call it NYC Enterprises, and these are for-profit companies that are for the public. So every dollar in profit that comes out of these companies goes back to our city budget, and that's how we're going to be able to afford to make the necessary investments today to have a very sustainable economy in the future.
I hope we'll get a chance to hear more about NYC Enterprises in the rest of this debate. But real quick, you mentioned cutting taxes. Can you name a tax that you would reduce?
Sure. So we're proposing cutting the city personal income tax for people making under 120 grand annually, and the sales tax, which is a regressive tax that disproportionately hurts our lower income and no income people.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese.
The zoning proposals that the mayor has implemented or is trying to implement there have been an unmitigated disaster. I think Bob pointed it out and others that basically it's caused more displacement because we have 200,000 more homeless people in the city under this mayor, and a lot of it is related to the fact that many neighborhoods are becoming unaffordable for the people that live there, and they wind up on the streets, they wind up in the shelters. I have a plan to pass a pied-à-terre tax on mostly foreign-owned apartments, pied-à-terres, where they basically warehouse their money there, they warehouse the apartments. New York City, the Financial Times just did a piece, 15% of the luxury real estate is owned by foreign investors. The same thing is happening in Brooklyn. I want to tax them at a higher rate and direct that money into an affordable housing fund. We have 1,000 city parcels that I would use to build true affordable housing. The people in those zip codes where we build could actually afford. And that could create about 70,000 affordable housing units and $1 billion in that fund through that pied-à-terre tax, which I think is politically viable because it doesn't impact New York City residents. The other issue that I think has to be addressed is living wage jobs. Why aren't we building our subway cars here in New York City? Chicago, Rahm Emanuel just worked out a deal with a company that's building their subway cars, and they're hiring kids from the neighborhood, from some of the poor areas of the city, and these are great living wage jobs. We let $18 billion in contracts every year. Our economy is as big as a country. We should use that to help our kids in our neighborhoods, especially in our poor neighborhoods. A lot of knowledge folks are coming into the city, but it doesn't do much for the kids in many of our poor communities. So I'm going to look to use the city's contracting power to hire city residents to do as much of the work here as we can. Another area is 1,000 small businesses are going under a month in this city. There's an epidemic of empty storefronts throughout the city. I want to pass a Small Business Job Survival Act, which has the majority sponsors in the city council, which would eliminate the rent gouging that's going on. It would be a mediation and arbitration approach where merchants in good standing could work out reasonable arrangements with landlords, because it is a mess out there now. Communities are being impacted. Most of those business owners are immigrants. That's the first step on the economic ladder for those folks, and we're basically abandoning them. De Blasio doesn't even talk about the legislation that he wants sponsored, by the way, because of the big real estate donations that he gets.
I'd like to follow up on the tax cut idea, if I may.
Sure, quickly, please.
So very quickly, I think we need to go past the idea of a pied-à-terre tax. I think we should be raising taxes on anyone who has a secondary residence or uses an apartment for rental purposes. It's a different category of use. It's a commercial use at that point. I think we need to have a reduced taxes for people who are primary residents of New York City, and for the people who have second homes or use it for rental income, we should raise their taxes. And we can do that in New York City because we have control over the taxes in New York City. We don't have control over the income taxes.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to, in terms of the affordability issue, two other changes that we're promoting very aggressively. One is to eliminate the fare for low-income people in New York City. Taking our subways and our buses is an issue that de Blasio has at best punted on, and also to promote free tuition in our CUNY schools for low and middle-income New Yorkers. I think
We'll stop you there. We heard the two ideas.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so actually, Mr. Gangi, we're going to start with you with this next question, and it still stays with the idea of affordability, but it goes back to the ideas of small business and taxing on small business and property taxes and how that affects rents for small businesses. So when a small business pays the rent, they also pay a portion of property taxes when they're storefronts. And also small businesses that own the buildings also have to pay their property taxes. Those property taxes have gone up exponentially over the years. A lot of businesses are closing because of the rents and the taxes that are part of those rents or the property taxes themselves. how will you fight for those people that are losing their businesses because they just can't afford the taxes that are part of their daily operations?
Well, we would move toward putting those costs, the property tax costs, more on the backs of the landlords. But more directly,
sometimes small businesses are their own landlords.
well, not in most of the small businesses that I'm aware of. They are renting.
A lot of them, actually.
What?
Actually, there are a lot of small businesses that are landlords, and they may be the only tenants in those buildings.
Right, well, maybe I'm thinking about the small businesses in my neighborhood who have been closing, where they're clearly closing because the rent that the landlord has wanted to charge has gone up exponentially, because there's no, like there's rent control and rent stabilization for residential apartments, there's no controls on what rents landlords could charge for commercial storefronts. So we would advocate very strongly for some form of commercial rent control. We had commercial rent control under LaGuardia, and it was vacated, and some people who oppose it have claimed that it's illegal and unconstitutional. We actually don't think that that's true. And we support the Small Business Job Survival Act, which I'll refer to, which would give the tenants in those buildings leverage in negotiating whatever the next rent was going to be that's imposed by the landlords. I'll get to the point that you made. We would move to reduce those taxes. And my understanding is that the City Council has proposals like that on the table, and de Blasio is opposing those proposals. So we would move to reduce those taxes, alleviate the financial burden in cases where the landlord is not the occupant of the building. We would give more leverage, more negotiation standing to the people in those commercial storefronts. The other thing that we would look very closely at is landlords don't, in some cases at least, don't want to rent that space because they're able to write off that the space that's not being rented as a loss, and it enables them to reduce whatever taxes that they have to pay. So we would look at if there was a way of eliminating that tax break provision for landlords, so there would be an incentive for them to have occupants in those spaces.
All right, Mr. Tolkin.
Again, I think we can't look at any one issue in isolation. We need a comprehensive approach to addressing our economy. But we do face a small business crisis today, and 1,000 businesses closing a month is a real problem. And every business that closes is a missed opportunity for future job growth, for future income growth, for future economic development. So the first thing that we need to do is issue a series of subsidies and grants to keep our small businesses in business while we restructure our economy in a way that that benefits everyone. The other thing that we can do—
Where would that money come from?
Through our new source of funding, NYC Enterprises, public-private partnership, and the growth of our economy overall, where we'll be increasing our tax base to be able to offset some of these upfront column investments. The other thing that we're going to be doing is developing a series of support programs for our small businesses, helping them to transition from brick and mortar in some cases to having an online presence and delivery-based platforms to compete more effectively with some of the larger companies that are real threats to their business today and are eating their market.
All right, Mr. Albanese.
Well, I want to go back to the Small Business Job Survival Act, because I think that is the answer to a lot of the issues, with the exception of the one you raised about the landlords that own their own business. I think we have to definitely reduce taxes on those entrepreneurs. But the major problem is rent. I mean, we're talking about exorbitant rent increases, not 10%, 20%, 1,000%. There's a gentleman who just wrote a book called Vanishing New York, Jeremiah Moss, who actually has endorsed me, by the way, we took a tour of the Lower East Side. I mean, it's incredible how many storefronts are just empty. I mean, we did a survey of the Upper East Side, empty storefronts everywhere. And I have a friend I went to law school with who's pretty wealthy, lives on the Upper West Side, and he stopped me, he said, "Sal, you got to do something about these small businesses going under. I can't buy a bagel on the West Side anymore." So it's impacting communities. Well, that's what he said. It's impacting communities because they have a relationship with these merchants. They've been there for years. It's impacting immigrants. Each one of those businesses on the average, has 8 employees. So we're talking about thousands of people that are going on the unemployment lines because we're not doing anything about these entrepreneurs, who in good standing, by the way. And what's really troubling is that we have a mayor who doesn't even address this issue. I mean, he talks about jobs being increased in the city, but the small business community is in a crisis. I've never seen anything like it. So, and we also have 28 sponsors of this bill on the city council. And as soon as I become mayor, the first thing I'm going to do is get this thing passed. And I'm proud to say that the Small Business Congress has also endorsed my candidacy. But I think it's one of the issues that de Blasio has totally ignored. We've had a debate, and he didn't even address it. So I believe that we need to really bolster those folks for a lot of reasons, especially the fact that most of them are new immigrants. That's the way they start climbing the economic ladder.
All right. Mr. Bashner?
I'd like to answer your question directly about the real estate taxes because I don't think it's been sufficiently covered here. Anytime we cut taxes on one group, we either have to raise taxes on another group or do without more teachers or more firefighters or police. So although the easy answer is to say we're going to reduce taxes, I don't know that we can do that necessarily. And I do agree with some of the other candidates here that the taxes are a piece of the problem, but not the biggest piece. The biggest piece is rising rents. In terms of the taxes, I think that we do need to offer some relief to businesses going forward. I don't know that we need to cut the taxes, but we do need to maybe cap the taxes so that increases going forward are limited as they are for single-family homes, for example. You can't experience more than a certain percentage increase in a 5-year period, and the idea is to create some stability in the market. In terms of the Small Business Job Survival Act, there are many good qualities in that. I think it's very important for small businesses to know before their lease is up whether or not they're going to be offered a renewal. If they're not going to be offered a renewal, they need to be able to have time to relocate to another location if they can find one. The biggest problem we have right now is the blight of empty storefronts. And it's curious that in a time of thriving economy right now, we have empty storefronts like we did back in the 1970s when the economy was terrible. And let's look at that. Why is that the case? In many cases, it's because of the function of real estate financing. People have bought these buildings based on projections about where the rents are supposed to go in an ever-rising market. And when they don't rise, they have to either accept a tenant for less than their projections and have problems with their lenders because they're not meeting their financial requirements and the ratios under the lending, or they are going to be in default under their loans. So what do we need to do? We need to treat it like the blight it is, and we need to think about fining and penalizing landlords who leave their storefronts open for more than a certain period of time. Is it 6 months, 9 months? Certainly no longer than a year. Some of these storefronts have been open for years at this point, and it's a real blight.
So over the course of a couple decades, we've seen some crime drops. We've also seen, some corresponding, it seems like, or a similar trend, graduation rates in schools sort of, slowly, but over many years, ticking upward. However, on education, we still have far too many, obviously, New York City students not graduating from high school. And of those that do, far too many are not prepared for even a 2-year program or a 4-year program at CUNY. So on education, what are the things specifically that need to be done to improve the situation here in New York City, Mr. Tolkin?
So we're proposing what we call NYC Talent, which is an entire reframing of our education system. Instead of having a system that prepares our kids for the jobs of the past or even for the jobs of today, we need to be developing a system that prepares them for the jobs of the future. So that means teaching them less about what to think and more about how to think. Skills like problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration. Good for life, but also really good for the future, the future workplace. We need to be redesigning our schools to look less like prison cells and more like the job, the office place today, which means open, collaborative workspaces, team exercises. We need to be implementing vocational programs in the pre-K-12 system so that our kids coming out of 12th grade don't even need to go to a 2-year or 4-year CUNY program, that they have the skills required to go and pull in a meaningful income coming out of 12th grade. There are examples of this. There's the Ghetto Film School in the Bronx that has taken a film school program and bolted it on to a high school. And the kids coming out of that program have unbelievable skills. They're great storytellers, they're great creatives, and more important than anything else, those skills translate to other industries. So taking more of a macro approach, we should be able to redesign our education system in a way that benefits kids today, but more important than anything else is preparing them for their future, because we know that the future is going to look a lot different from the way it looks today. There's new technology, there are new industries, there's a ton of opportunity, but if we're not preparing our kids for the opportunities of the future, then we're going to just perpetuate the cycle, and it's going to be a problem.
Thank you. Mr. Albanese?
As you know, I've had a bird's eye view of education, being in the classroom for 11 years and working with a lot of poor kids. And the sad story of these numbers that de Blasio is rolling out is that 67% of the kids graduating can't do college work. The reading scores, negligible increases. The kids in some of the low-performing schools have done worse under his administration. The numbers are up a little bit on the graduation rates because the better-performing schools did significantly better. But the kids that really need help are doing worse under this administration, if you look at the stats. And part of the problem is we're not doing enough in the beginning. Neurologists have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that 0 to 3 are the most important ages for these kids. That's where the brain develops. And stress and poverty causes chemical changes in these kids. And when they come into our schools, a lot of them are behind and never catch up. They have anger management issues, executive decision problems. So what I want to do is open up pediatric wellness centers in poor communities in the city. Start working with mothers during the gestation period so that we can really help them with child rearing and making sure that they form attachment with their children, because by the time they come into our schools, when 4 or 5 years old, many of these kids are really behind and never catch up. And this is not Sal Albanese talking, this is neurologists. There's a book written by Paul Tuff, the New York Times Magazine did a piece on this. And we're not approaching that. Even the pre-K program and the alleged 3K program is not going to reach those kids. So I'm going to focus very heavily on 0 to 3 and open up these pediatric wellness centers in poor communities in the city where we have teams of healthcare professionals working with mothers during the gestation period and also for the first 3 years.
Having heard that idea about, pre-K to 12, though, when you come in, you'll obviously have those students already there. Is the mayor not closing enough schools? Are there not enough? What's something that's happening there?
He's obviously, the renewal schools, he's spending $350 million. The results have been abysmal. We need to reduce class size in the early grades. The class size is too high. In suburbia, there are 18, 19 kids in a class. In New York City public schools, we have 30 kids to a class. So I would lower class size, especially in the early grades. Also, each school has to have, obviously, listen, good principals. We have to attract and recruit good principals, because at the end of the day, when I was teaching, I knew about 7 or 8 principals that I could appoint them anywhere in the city, and they would turn that school around in 2 years. Leadership is very important, and I think we're not doing enough to identify and recruit good leaders for those buildings, because they motivate teachers. Teachers could go either way, and a good leader motivates them to do well in the classroom.
Thank you. Mr. Bashner on education.
60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, New York City schools remain separate and unequal. We have something like 60% of the children who can't pass the reading and math tests. The school system is brilliant in some respects, and in other respects, it's a complete disaster. The mayor's plan for turning around schools has not worked. He spent $350 million and gotten an increase in reading rate from 13% to 16% on the pass rate, and an increase in passing on the math tests from 8 to 9%. What about the other 90% of the kids who can't do math, and the other 80% of the kids who are not passing the reading tests? We need to have a change, a sea change in the culture in the New York City schools. It's got to start from the top down, and we need to make sure that no child graduates from elementary school without being able to read and do math. We have to make sure that every middle school child has access to a tablet or a laptop computer, because right now, if you don't, you're falling further behind. Everybody works in a collaborative way, not only in the best schools, but in business, and it's a different approach. We have so many possibilities using modern technology now that we could be using that we're not using. The Khan Academy, for example, has recently partnered with the SAT program to provide free test preparation for all of the students out there who can't afford tutoring or don't have people to help them. You get a free test preparation program for the SAT. Why aren't we doing the same thing for the SHSAT, the selective exam for our city's best schools? Why aren't we doing it for the Regents exams? Why aren't we having our best teachers across the city record programs that are similar to the Khan Academy, so that we can get the best practices spread among all the schools and lift up all of the students? We need to do so much more than we're doing. We need to have a STEAM curriculum, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And we need arts because unless you teach kids to dream, and unless you teach kids what the whole purpose of schooling is, they're not going to be motivated to succeed. And we need to teach life skills. We need to have a robust after-school program that teaches kids mastery and makes them feel good about their ability to achieve, so that they can go on and focus on school and do well and lift themselves above their circumstances.
Thank you. Mr. Gangi on education.
Right. When we started the campaign, I was most known for promoting jail reform, police reform. We knew we had to run a campaign that wasn't focused on one issue. So we looked at education and the public schools, and what we found is there is a single factor where virtually everybody agrees, and all the research shows, will improve the academic outcome for all students across race and class lines, and that's small class size. Sal mentioned that in a lot of the public schools, the classes will be 30 or 32 kids in a class, where if you go to a private school, it's 12 kids in a class, 15 kids in a class, and that's why people sometimes have to stretch their own finances in order to put their children into schools where they think they'll get a decent education. My administration would promote small class sizes for all the 1.1 million children who go to our public schools. Why should it be that in our city, only wealthy people or people who somehow or another put together the resources can send their kids to a class where there's only 12 children or 15 children in a class? Every child in the city deserves that opportunity, deserves that kind of rich experience that they can get from a public school. So that would be our principal commitment. We would look for the money from some of the things I mentioned before, reducing our criminal justice budget, reducing our police department budget, closing Rikers Island, and reducing or cutting some of the capital expenditures that de Blasio has proposed and is included in this year's budget, to provide the billions of dollars that would be necessary to provide small classes again for every child and a richer experience for that child, and just consider the kind of improvement it would be in the quality of life, not just for those children, not just for their families, but the communities they return to. So that would be what we promote most aggressively.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up, if I may. I think that we also need to have merit pay and bonus pay for teachers and principals who are going to go in and try and turn around troubled schools and create new schools. Because in the private sector, when we want to incentivize something, we pay people more, and we can't do that in New York right now. We also need to change the work rules so that we include in our schools a robust tutoring program after school, which may mean having teachers stretch their hours and have more free periods during the day. There are ways to reorder our current environment in the schools that would be more productive and really meet the needs of the children who need to learn.
Thank you.
Go
ahead, one last point.
The other thing that we've learned is that the Department of Education is being mismanaged. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that are being wasted through the controllers audits. We could use that money to reduce class size, have art, music, and sports programs. I mean, what kept me in high school was I had to pass 3 subjects to stay on the baseball teams. I was really not interested in academics at that time, but I knew I had to pass those 3 subjects to stay on that varsity baseball team. That kept me in school. We need for some kids it's music, for some kids it's art. So those enrichment programs are very important, and also physical education. There's a relationship between cognitive development and physical activity. So the more active you are, the more engaged you are physically, your brain functions better. And many schools around the city don't have physical education. They don't even have gyms.
Unfortunately, gentlemen,
We're gonna have to move on.
we're moving on. This is actually our last question because we are quickly running out of time. So this last question, we're going to start with you, Mr. Albanese, and it's going to homelessness. And we've touched on it a little bit, but we're at record high levels. And we have seen some of the programs that the current mayor has tried to put in place. He had a plan of going from the bottom of the city to the top of the city on a daily basis, talking to homeless people and doing something with them. I don't think that ever actually came to fruition. We have over 45,000 children that sleep in shelters. As mayor, what would you do to stem this rising epidemic of homelessness, and where would you find these funds?
It's a tragedy. 21% increase in homeless students in our public schools just last year, and it relates. There's a nexus between the mayor's zoning proposals, which are driving people out of neighborhoods and into the streets and into shelters. For example, 30% of the families that are in shelters actually work. Some of them work 2 jobs. I've met a couple of folks that are in hotels that work in 2 fast food restaurants. A woman with her daughter. I would prioritize those people that are in shelters, and because they could actually even contribute to their rent and provide rental subsidies for them. Get them out of shelters, get them into apartments, and really reduce the homeless population. And the mayor has not prioritized those people. The other thing I would do is obviously build real affordable housing, as I mentioned before, through my affordable housing fund, where we would keep people in apartments that they could afford, because right now they're being driven out. If you look at the stats for homeless children, most of them come out of places like Central Brooklyn, the Bronx, where property values have skyrocketed. They simply can't afford to live there. So there's a nexus between building affordable housing and the fact that we have so many homeless people on the street. And the mayor has spent $2 billion and has gotten no results at all. Things are worse than ever. He also has to find time to meet with people. The deputy mayor that he hired left after 6 months because he didn't find time to meet with her. She was an expert on homelessness. So I would bring in the best and the brightest, build affordable housing, and also deal with the mental health issue. I would like to reduce the number of shelters because they're poorly managed. There's violence going on. We need more supportive housing. We got to get people out of those shelters. We've done a good job with veterans. They've been able to get veterans out of the shelters because there's federal subsidies for these veterans. We need to do the same thing with the shelters. Obviously, I would also assign more security for the shelters, because I talked to some of the security officers. They're overwhelmed, and try to the intake center in Manhattan is a disaster. So I would make those shelters significantly more secure.
Mr. Bashner?
This is a mayor who ran on a platform of trying to help the most vulnerable New Yorkers. And instead, what he's done is driven them out of their apartments and into the streets. We have economic refugees at this point, and there'll be a continuing stream of economic refugees if we have another 4 years of Mayor de Blasio. His proposals for building create a land rush in which people try to evict people. And finally, in the 4th year of his term, we finally got the mayor to sign some legislation that protects existing tenants. But it doesn't go far enough. We have to have more anti-displacement efforts, and that should include, for new development, payment into an anti-displacement fund that would help people who need assistance as they're relocating. No one wants to wind up in the streets. Unless there's a fire or a flood or a hurricane, they shouldn't wind up in the streets. There should be an orderly process in which people get assistance and can relocate either within the city or even outside the city with other family members, not-for-profit groups, religious groups, charitable groups who can help. And that's the first part, which is to reduce the number of people coming into the system. The next part is the number of people passing through the system and how long it takes. Because of the chaotic conditions in the shelters, it's hard for people who are in this homeless system to focus on what the next steps in their lives are. The kids, as you mentioned, 45,000 kids, can't focus on school because they're moved from shelter to shelter every so often. And we need to get them through the system and out the other side and provide reliability until the end of the school year. On the other side, we have to build new housing, create more trust in the neighborhoods, and persuade people in the neighborhoods that they need to accept their fair share of homeless families who are, after all, the very people who live in the neighborhood. Their children go to the schools in the neighborhood, and there, before the grace of God, go many people. And so we need to create trust. We need to not have, like we have in the Bronx now, a situation where it was supposed to be affordable housing, and instead it's going to be changed to homeless shelters so that private operators can profiteer.
All right, Mr. Gangi.
We'd have a key commitment to affordability across the range of issues and concerns that we talked about. So providing true affordable housing. Research shows that the main reason for homelessness is a lack of affordable housing. So we'd have a commitment to true affordable housing, commitment to free tuition at the community schools, eliminate the fare for poor New Yorkers, provide jobs through public works projects, so create a more affordable economy and a more affordable city generally. Getting to the homeless issue, though, we need to take immediate steps, because those things that I've talked about and that we've all talked about, I don't think involve an immediate response to the current crisis. So what we would do is declare a crisis, declare an emergency, and we would use eminent domain to take over properties. We'd start with those hotels that are now where the city is paying huge amounts of rents in order to house homeless families. So through eminent domain, we would take over properties, we would pay a fair market price for those properties and turn them into homes now immediately for homeless families.
All right, Mr. Tolkin.
Well, first, the problem is heartbreaking. So when I decided to run for office, I knew this was going to be a big challenge that we would need to tackle head on. And the first thing I did was jump into my research and go homeless myself. So I slept on couches and friends and acquaintances. I slept on the streets to really understand the psychology of a homeless person's life. In meeting with these people, you know, they're on the streets for a variety of reasons, but through no fault of their own. And that's something that's really important that we continue to elevate to the public consciousness. These are people that have struggled, that were just dealt a bad hand, or have some sort of mental illness. A third of our homeless population is struggling with some form of undiagnosed or untreated mental illness. And so in terms of informing a solution, again, comprehensive, long-term, the notion that we can, solve this with a quick fix or with more shelters is absurd. So we're proposing what we call NYC Life, and this is an end-to-end rehabilitation program for our homeless population. Safe interim housing, mental health care for the people who need it, comprehensive physical care, and most important, job training, vocational training, so that we're not just getting them off the street, but we're helping them to get back on their feet, reintegrate themselves into society in a value-added capacity. And one last point, I think it's really important that we continue to go back to the central issue here, which is that the economy is not working for everyone. It's playing out in a variety of ways. Our kids aren't prepared through our education system. Our health programs are inadequate. Our housing is inadequate. Our infrastructure is falling apart. And so if we're serious about being a modern society and making sure that everyone in our city is taken care of, then we have to be addressing the underlying systemic issues of economic inequality.
All right, thank you. And now we are going right to closing statements, and we are going to start with you, Mr. Gangi.
How much time do we have for the closing statement?
1 minute for closing statements.
Okay. I'm going to put this part of what I'm going to say back on you guys. I was surprised. There's no question about policing, no question about Rikers, no question about our dysfunctional, racist, and abusive criminal justice system. And that's a critical issue for the city, a critical issue primarily for low-income people of color in our city. We have a commitment from day one to end broken windows policing, to end the quota system. Day one, we will fire all the officers who were involved in the death of Eric Garner. It is a shame for our city and for this current mayor that all those officers who piled on Eric Garner, who ignored him saying 11 times, "I can't breathe," that they still work for the NYPD. So we would take very dramatic steps to transform the NYPD and eliminate its racist and abusive practices. We would close Rikers in year one. We would take steps to reduce the unchecked power of our prosecutors so there's more fairness in our courts. So that is our deep commitment to justice for our city and to improve quality of life for everybody in our city.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Bashner.
I would like to speak to all of the New Yorkers right now who are disillusioned, who are tired of divisive politics, who are tired of Donald Trump, who are tired of being under assault from Washington and assault in their very neighborhoods by Mayor de Blasio's out-of-control real estate development and privatization of public assets and failure to listen to each of the neighborhoods and their voices. As a community board leader for 18 years and as a real estate lawyer, I've developed the skills and the abilities to work with people, to build consensus, and to move projects forward in a way that makes everyone feel as though they're being listened to, respected, and their viewpoints are included. We have a mayor who has been selling us out to developers and lobbyists in a corrupt administration. We have 40% more homeless people on the streets than last year. We have failing subways. We have many failing schools. We have 80% of the people who are sent to Rikers Island have not been convicted of a crime, and they're just there for pretrial detention at huge cost to the taxpayers and great destruction to their own lives. We have 90% of the people who have been arrested for marijuana in the past 3 years have been 90% Black or Latino. If I'm elected mayor, I will fight against injustice. I will fight to lift up all New Yorkers, and I will fight to make New York again feel like the capital of the world. Thank you.
Mr. Albanese.
First, let me thank you for hosting this debate and my colleagues for participating. I wish the mayor was here. I am the New York City story. Yeah, I came here with nothing, an immigrant, attended the public schools, CUNY graduate, went to law school and I got my law degree, taught for 11 years, stellar career in the city council. Nobody could ever question my integrity or my independence. So I have the experience to run the city. I have broad-based experience. And I am committed to funding and fixing our mass transit system, building true affordable housing, ending the corruption that we have in this city. I never want a headline in the Daily News which says mayor for sale. I've got a plan to revamp the political system so average New Yorkers will understand that we have a true democracy. And I ask people to go to my website, voteforsal.com, and review my proposals, especially on political reform, which I think is the most important issue facing the city and the country. I want New York City to be a model democracy. I call it the modern Athens, so we can have a ripple effect across the country, because what we do here has an impact not only here, but throughout the country. So I welcome the support of people out there, and I hope that I'm asking for their vote on September 12th.
All right, and Mr. Tolkin.
Well, thank you for having me, and again to my colleagues for participating. You know, the single greatest challenge we face is the economy, and we need to be taking a much more comprehensive approach to addressing our solutions if we're going to create sustainable solutions. So to that end, we're going to modernize our government, we're going to grow and diversify our economy, we're going to upgrade city services and infrastructure, and most important, we're going to implement a robust economic resilience plan so that every single New Yorker has the opportunity to pull in a meaningful income that gives them the quality of life that they deserve. So that will be sort of my final statement. It's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy, and we need to be fixing it so that it works for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank all the candidates for participating in today's debate. The primary elections will be held on Tuesday, September 12th.
For more information about voting, locating your poll site, and the candidates, you can visit the League of Women Voters website, lwvnyc.org, or mnn.org.
And you can also visit us at gothamgazette.com. Please remember, only voters enrolled in a political party having a primary may vote in a primary election in New York City.
Thank you for watching Race to Represent on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Goodbye.